Hi everyone, Linda Bond here, excited to tell you that Flatline is on sale, and I wanted to share an excerpt from chapter 1 of this book. To set it up quickly, the main character, Rachel Wright, is a reporter, and she's bringing her friend Jackie to the emergency room with some very suspicious symptoms. Sound familiar? A medical thriller, released during a medical thriller. When she gets to the ER, she runs into someone that she hasn't seen for a while, someone she knows very well. After her brother died here 5 years ago, she'd lost both her best buddy and her deep faith, and she'd gained an unexpected daughter and her 7-year-old niece, as well as an obsessive fear and mistrust of doctors and hospitals. Rachel shuddered, remembering the emotional agony of that night, the older brother she'd looked up to all her life, dying right in front of her. Not even a year after his wife, whom Rachel had adored, had died in a car accident. Another bad night in a sterile hospital. Now their daughter was an orphan. Rachel was her guardian. She had not stepped foot in a hospital since Jim's death. What's going on? Her spine straightened. She recognized that voice instantly. His voice had always held that doctor's authority, deep, demanding, sometimes difficult. Her pulse picked up, outpacing beeps coming from a nearby monitor. She looked at him. Dr. Joshua Salvador had not changed much. Tall, muscular, but leaner now, like he'd taken up running, or still hadn't gotten over the stress of her brother's death and what had followed. With those startling blue eyes against his black hair, he had that Patrick Dempsey kind of look, his personality just a shade on the darker side. His big hands were balled up, a big, brooding Dr. McDreamy. Rachel held her breath, along with her expectations. What would he do when he realized she was there? He strode across the room with that fierce determination she'd witnessed for years, that confidence that really had impressed her at first. His feet pounded the floor, his eyes focused on the patient, and he left this trail of energy in his wake, heating her skin as he strode by. She held her breath. Dr. Salvador, the patient started seizing about a minute ago. The nurse was still holding Jackie's head. She's unresponsive, and I haven't been able to get all of her vitals. Joshua strode to the bed. He placed his stethoscope to her chest and listened. He still had not looked at her. Rachel's heart beat like an intern facing her first confrontational news interview. How many ER physicians worked at Tampa Bay Hospital? Dozens at least. And her ex-boyfriend had to be working today. Rachel placed a hand on her chest. Could Joshua hear her heart pounding? Because she could hear her pulse drumming in her ears, and she felt a little life throwing up herself. What's wrong with her? I'm not sure yet, Joshua said, his voice booming. So he did know. She was in the room. Joshua pressed his fingers into Jackie's wrist. Nurse Dawson, her skin is a bit jaundiced, pulse weak. He moved Jackie's sleeve up, profound swelling and marked bruising extending over her left upper arm. He continued in that professional, robotic tone. I need a complete blood count and a metabolic profile. He still hadn't looked at Rachel. Tox screen, Ativan for seizure. She's going to be all right, though. Right, Joshua? Rachel couldn't keep the doubt out of her voice. She hadn't meant for it to be there. She knew what doubt would do to him. Joshua didn't look up, but his body stilled for an instant. It was so quick, his nurse probably didn't notice. But she did. Jackie stopped shaking, but she continued to twitch. Rachel's knees went weak. This felt like deja vu for so many reasons. It had been 5 years since her brother had died in this very ER, and Joshua was in the room. 5 years since she'd become a mother to her grieving niece. 5 years since she'd investigated Joshua's ER physicians group for medical malpractice. 5 years since Todd, the doctor in charge that night, had been reassigned. 5 years since Joshua had broken up with her over her series of stories. 5 years since she'd been promoted into the investigative unit, becoming Rachel Makes It Right. 5 years since she'd signed a new contract, which was up in a few months. 5 years since she'd had a decent night's sleep. The beeps of a machine sped up to an alarming rate. A baby's cry from another room escalated into a wail. Skims warmed to the touch. Joshua pulled his fingers from Jackie's wrist, and he finally looked at Rachel. The heat of his gaze lit her cheeks on fire, and she stumbled backwards. Today felt so different from the day they'd met here in the hospital almost 7 years earlier. She'd been with Jackie on that day, too. Jackie had come down with some annoying case of bronchitis. Joshua had treated her. He'd been intensely flirting with her. Jackie had noticed and had slipped Joshua Rachel's number. Well, the man in front of her now had hardened into a different kind of man, and she was partially responsible for that change. "You're not supposed to be here," he said. The frantic activity stopped, and for one brief moment the room calmed as if the energy had been vacuumed out of it. Then his words broke the suction. "You're not family. I know you're not. And you have to leave." Rachel took a step forward, her breath sputtering. At one time, the three of them had been like family. "I can't leave, Jackie. You know I..." His hand shot out, silencing her. "That was not a request. This is my hospital, my trauma room, my order. Get out." Feet wide, Rachel braced herself for a fight. She wasn't leaving until she knew Jackie wasn't going to die. What happens next? Thanks for watching.